Hi everyone, I'm Cassie. I'm a writer and a spiritual coach. So I'm doing a video today, I guess inspired by Transgender Day of Visibility. So I think there's a lot going on about trans people right now and trans rights. And from my perspective, even people who support trans rights and are on board with this, I feel like the narrative around it doesn't include a lot of the nuance that I feel, and I feel a little bit like it doesn't include my perspective. So I guess I'm here to share a bit of my own perspective and experience. And if I were to go back to, I guess, the origin story of my discomfort with the gender binary, I have to go back pretty far to young childhood. So maybe around like 5 or 6. I do remember having feelings about gender as early as that. And I remember having this sense of like, these rules really don't make sense. So in elementary school, I remember thinking, well, people tell me I'm a girl, I have like a girl name and all of this, but actually on paper, I'm a little bit more of a boy. I was very good at math and science from a young age. I would probably pick up a truck or an airplane rather than a doll. I know that's kind of like a trivial example, but I was a little bit like, well, based on the rules that you guys gave to me, I'm actually more of a boy than a girl. And I found that no matter how much I actually aligned with that boy thing, those boy rules, people still treated me like a girl regardless. And I kind of had this sense of, well, they're kind of breaking their own rules because, again, by their definition, I'm actually more of this thing than that thing. And so I really had this sense of like, this really isn't for me. I don't like this. I guess I'm a girl, but I really don't like that I have no control over how I'm treated and how sort of illogical this thing is. So I struggled with it. And, I had this sort of low level discomfort with it throughout my life. And I came out as gay or I guess a lesbian when I was 18. And when I was a young adult, I started having relationships, I started having sex, and I was like, oh, these things are kind of ways for me to explore gender in a different way that I've never been able to before. And I found that really liberating. And I remember being probably 24, I think. And I was like, well, maybe I'm a trans guy. I was in a queer community with people, and there were a lot of trans guys there. And I was like, well, maybe that's more of what I am. So I went through this period of exploring a new name and like he, him pronouns. And I actually didn't really like that either. It sort of felt like a differently shaped prison. And I was thinking about it at that time, and I was like, I think what I actually want is to be liberated from other people's assumptions and gendered expectations. I want to like go through the world in such a way that people don't project their gendered expectations onto me. That is truly my desire when it comes to gender. And I've learned from research and multiple therapists that this is not possible. At the end of the day, I don't have any control over how people treat me, and I'm still mad about it. I find it really frustrating because really what I do want is to be able to walk through the world and to not have people try to figure out what my genitals look like or how my body is shaped before they feel like they can interact with me. Like I'm just a Cassie. Like it's not that complicated from my perspective. And so to me, being trans and non-binary, and again, this is my experience, some trans people do sort of align on the gender binary, and that's like totally fine for them. But my experience of being trans and non-binary is not just that I'm not a woman or I'm not a man. I just find the whole thing a little bit ridiculous. I kind of reject the entire premise of gender as a main facet of our identity and like at the core of how we relate to each other. So I don't personally believe that, oh, two categories is wrong and we should have three or four or 80 categories. There's 8 billion people on this planet, and if we were to talk about experiences of gender, I think that number might be closer to 8 billion than it is to two. There's probably common themes on there. Like if I talk to other non-binary people, especially, there often are common themes, and we do have some shared experiences and a shared relationship to gender. But also, we're all individuals as well. And so I really relate to this idea of being gender expansive. And actually, I think gender expansive could also include, like, for people who even are cis-identified, that could be like, this fits me well enough, but there's a lot in here that I don't like. And these things really are not for me. But, I just still identify that way because it's part of how I see myself. It's part of how I relate to the world. So I think there's like a lot of ways and a lot of shapes that this can take. And it's not always as simple as was born into the wrong body. Although for a lot of trans people, they know that from a young age, that they were born into the wrong body, that they were born in a girl's body, but they're actually a boy, or vice versa. And that's totally valid. Um, but I think there's a really big part of gender that for me is explorative. So part of my desire is that I want to know what that X or Y or whatever gender feels like. I want to be able to inhabit and go to these different experiences and see what's there. I want to see what parts of myself are revealed when my expression changes. I think it's really interesting to see how people's perception of me and how they relate to me is different if my external expression is different. Because at the end of the day, I'm still like the same person. So I do wish we approach trans rights not only from this place of like this biological imperative. I also have the right to express my gender in whatever way that I want because I'm an autonomous human and I choose to do so. That is also a completely valid reason to change or explore or play with gender. In my 20s, especially, I was very into traveling and I traveled a lot of places. I backpacked the Grand Canyon. I trekked through the Himalayas to the base camp of Mount Everest, and no one ever shamed me for going to the Grand Canyon just because I wasn't born there. But yet people will shame me for expressing my gender in a way that's different than the one that I was assigned at birth when a doctor took a look at me and said, "You are this for the rest of your life." And sometimes when I feel like people just accept the gender that's assigned to them and never question it and never explore it in any way, I feel a little bit like that. I feel a little bit the same way as like someone who was born and raised in their hometown and they never really went anywhere else. Like that's a valid choice that you could make, but it's not the choice that I would make. And you can't expect other people to make the same choices that you do. Because, yeah, I think traveling is interesting and we get to learn more and experience more. And I feel that way about gender too. And I have learned more and I have experienced more in my life because I have um, a expression that is beyond like the girl or woman that people think that I am. And when I talk about trans rights and gender expression, someone whose work comes to the forefront of my mind is Alok Manan. So they're a writer, a speaker, a comedian, a trans activist, I guess. I guess you could call them. And they talk about how when people are triggered and activated and give them hate messages, that they feel bad for those people who are directing that hatred towards them. Because those people are also directing that hatred and that policing of gender towards themselves. And honestly, I have felt that, and I still feel that within myself sometimes. Sometimes another person has a gender expression that feels like a lot to me, and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot. And I've learned to take that as an invitation to examining my relationship with myself And how am I still policing my gender? How am I limiting myself? How am I limiting my self-expression? Rather than saying that person is wrong because it makes me uncomfortable, it's like, that makes me uncomfortable. Like, what's underneath that? So, in some ways, I do understand why trans rights and trans people are threatening to the powers that be, are threatening to fascism. Because being trans in some way is reclaiming your power. It's reclaiming your divinity. It's saying that I have the right to define myself. It's saying that I will transcend this category that was placed upon me. I can be more than who I was just told that I am. I don't have to go by that. I can create my own thing. And someone who's been on that journey and made those choices, especially in the face of the opposition that trans people face in the US and in other parts of the world, that person is a lot harder to control. There's a reason that trans people, gender nonconforming people, two-spirit people were shamans, were spiritual leaders in their communities because we're tapped into this sort of truth that we're not just a man, we're not just a woman, we are both. We are neither. Even in like the sort of modern spiritual communities, we have this whole thing about divine masculine and divine feminine, and I'm not inherently opposed to that, but the way some people do that is basically just a repackaged version of forcing the gender binary on everyone. So I guess in a spiritual sense, I'm a little more into the idea of divine union, that we all have these different things inside of ourselves, and we all have access to those at any time. We don't need to go through someone else. You don't need to be heterosexual and in some t twin flame relationship to experience divine union. We all have that within ourselves. We can all get there. So I guess I've sort of grown to see, the gender binary as almost like a dogmatic religion that I no longer believe in. I feel like my life is so much easier when I view it that way. When it's like, yeah, I don't believe in that thing. A lot of people believe in that thing, and they have the right to do that. But also, please don't force your dogmatic religion on other people because we did not sign up for that, and we don't want that, and we don't need that. So please don't take, trans day of visibility or trans rights, the whole concept in general, as something that is only about trans people, because it's not. It's about all of us. It's about how free we are allowed to be in our lives. It's about how much we are allowed to express ourselves. It's about how much we are able to explore and experience in our lifetimes. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful or insightful for you in some way, and I hope you take great care of yourself today. Bye.